broadcasting from Park Avenue in New York City. Brought to you by Global Wealth Office at Nest Seekers International and Classique Moderne. This is Peace and Good Wealth. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Peace and Good Wealth. This is Loy Carlos, your host, and today we have a very special guest. Leah Poller is a celebrated sculptor and cultural curator whose work explores the intersection of inner peace, identity, and creative abundance. Trained at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris and known for her acclaimed bed series and warrior women portraits, Poller uses figurative sculpture to reflect the psychology of self and society. Her art has been exhibited globally from Beijing to Mexico City, and she has curated over 140 exhibitions across 5 continents. Through her work, Poller reminds us that true wealth begins with understanding, expression, and the courage to lay ourselves bare. Welcome, Leah. How are you today?
I'm so flattered to be here, and thank you for that lovely introduction.
I messed up a little bit of École des Beaux-Arts in Paris. But I wanted to make sure that I pronounce it a little bit better than usual. But let's start there. The education-wise, you went to school in Paris. How did that? How much of that influence? Obviously, there's a discipline, the scholarly discipline that you learn in school. But how much of being in Paris influenced sort of the way you look at your work?
That's a wonderful question to start with, because I often say that my life began when I moved to France with my 3 little children and started the second part of my life. And my education at the Beaux-Arts in Paris began with a baptism by fire. The professor literally excoriated me and almost threw me out of the first sculpture class. And later we became very, very close friends. And I said to him, "Why did you do that to me? Why did you make it so hard?" And he said, "You didn't have any time to waste. You needed to know, was this for real or not?" And so it impacted me 1,000%.
Mm-hmm. And you said that was the second part of your life. What year, more or less, was this when you first started?
Oh, in the mid-'70s, I got to France.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And how France has changed since, and so has New York from the 1970s to where it is now. Tell us a little bit of a flavor of what it was living there with 3 children at that time, taking up art. What was Paris like back then?
The only expats that were really in Paris at that time either were working for the government, for large corporations, or with religious institutions. And so I was the real one out. Mm-hmm. There was nobody like me around. And of course, the fact that taxis wouldn't take 4 people, we were on foot a lot and in the subways a lot, mm-hmm. and that got a lot of attention from people. I went to Paris accidentally almost. I went for 3 months and I stayed for 23 years.
Wow.
So
let's so Paris at that time, how did you decide? Did you decide during those 3 months that were you already decided that you're going to study art, or was that something that was also not planned at the time?
Not at all. Not at all. I was trying to figure out how to survive. Mm-hmm. I had just sold my last home in Miami, was going through a divorce, had literally nothing, and ended up in Paris, and felt that it was a place I could make something happen for mm-hmm. myself, yes. And the art part came a few years later, where I got to realize my dream.
Mm-hmm. Where did you begin? Artists, a lot of the artists, start from a very young age, and they've dreamt about being, artists. Some transition in adulthood, but they've always had some sort of idea. When you were studying, when you picked up art, sculpture was not the first thing that you started to explore, right? Did you explore painting and any other forms of art before you went to sculpture?
Yes, because I was always hands-on in my earlier days, raising a family between sewing and knitting and cooking and decorating and gardening, all these things that you do physically. Um, I had a very physical relationship to art, but I wanted to be a painter. And I love color. So when I started at the Beaux-Arts, I started in the painting class, and there was this constant urge to just push the brush through the canvas. I had to really hold myself back. And then I always felt that the brushes were very long, that if I could shorten that distance. So after about 4 months in the painting class, the professor came over and said to me very kindly, "So Leah, that art school you went to in America, did they teach you how to hold a brush?" So I said, oops, he got me on that one. And so I drifted into the sculpture class and said, maybe if I get my hands on the material, that would work.
So let's talk about the creative process. What's the difference between, or is there any difference between the creative process when you're painting versus when you sculpt? I mean, where do you begin? In both cases, you start with a blank canvas, right? Either you're a block of stone or metal, or but everything is blank, and then form comes out of that. Would you think for you, is there a difference other than the physical process of doing it?
They often ask the question about art being contemporary, and I say it can't be anything except contemporary, because the artist is living there at that moment doing the thing. And so you can't leave yourself out of that equation. You bring with you a lot of your personal experiences, a lot of your subconscious thoughts, and then things trigger you, which is exactly how the bed series started. That was triggered. The process itself, where you're in an environment that is conducive to digging deep. And at the Beaux-Arts in France, we dealt a lot with the history in the past, so kind of building on the shoulders of these very, very famous artists. Some were still alive, some were still walking through the hallways, and at the time it was so strange. I didn't say, oh my goodness, I'm sitting in the same seat in this cafe that Jean-Paul Sartre sat in, but I did. So by osmosis and by the frequentation, the fabulous museum exhibitions, yeah, it was a total bath.
How much of knowing the history and what of art is important in the way you create? Some people would argue that there is something about going to school for art. And understanding, the principles and the history that makes for a much more profound or rounder artist than somebody who has not. How much of that you think is important if somebody wanted to really be an artist?
In other countries and in other cultures, and perhaps because they have thousands of years of culture behind them, and that was built on their knowing of the 1,000 years before them, they take great pride and spend a lot of time and interest in the past, so that you can then incorporate that in where you are in your present. It's hard to just free fall and say, I'm here and I'm going to just do hotchki-potchki with my hands and make something happen. So we got really serious training, and sometimes I have to find an analogy and say, oh my goodness, you have a problem in your brain, you need surgery. Oh, I'm going to get somebody who never studied, but he knows he can, take that knife and go after that little thing in my brain. It's the same with sculpture. You absolutely need to learn how to sculpt. Then you can do what you want. And we always say Picasso is the perfect example of that lesson.
And there are, through, we talk about, masters. The masters also have apprenticeships, and a lot of them studied, not necessarily to copy the masters, but to know the principles and the techniques, so that when they then in turn interpret or create art on their own, that they have that basic foundation, right, for for creating art. Now, art is a little bit difficult because what somebody sees in something isn't necessarily what somebody sees in another. So it's a little bit easier when we're looking at maybe portraiture, in paintings where, okay, well, this person looks like that real person. This painting looks like that real person. And you might say, well, that might be good art, that may not be. But when we talked about art at your lovely home,
Thank you for the visit.
yes, we talked about the energy of art. Okay, so let's talk about that a little bit. We were saying that you were saying that there's certain pieces, or pieces of art have their own energy, and some of them are really powerful, which now is what we call maybe a master art or a great work of art because people are drawn to them because of the energy that they have. So. How does that come about? Is it the artist that's creating this because of technique, or is it a combination of what the artist puts into it that comes out as the energy of that piece of work?
Well, very fortunately at this stage of my art practice, I've become more interested in science and in quantum physics. And you learn very quickly that we are just energy in fields of energy. And it kind of matched one of the ways I understood what I was doing in 3 dimensions, which was harnessing energy and pushing away the extraneous elements so that I would be left with the core. So I guess it's a little bit like, getting uranium for a bomb. You want all that energy, you want it compressed, and if you don't put it in, it's very hard to get it out.
Right.
The art that I feel has been the most significant across all borders, all cultures, is art that has in it that energy. Mm-hmm. There's a role that the observer, the beholder, has with the work of art. When you stand in front of a work of art, you give your energy to the art. Mm-hmm. You start looking at things, and that energy kind of goes in a circuitous fashion. It bounces back and forth and back and forth. So these masterpieces that we love so much, they're capturing energy from the people looking at them. I've always felt that one of the saddest things is to create so much art and never have it be seen. Mm-hmm. It needs to be seen to be alive.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I guess that's what it means when we say, if I pick up a sculpture or a painting, it's because this particular piece of art speaks to me, or this particular photograph speaks, to me as well. Now, a lot of artists also talk about when they're creating that there is this process of like tapping into the ether somehow. You don't really know what you're creating, but somehow you tap into this stream of consciousness in the universe, and it manifests itself in the art that you create. And I think that's a beautiful thing. I know for me, when I'm writing something, I'm not really fully aware of what that writing is until I'm finished. And then I look back at it and I say, wow, I didn't even think that was the case. Or even painting, it's sort of like the same way. Now, sculpture is a long process.
Yes.
It's not. So how patient do you have to be to get to the point where you know? Well, first of all, how do you know when a particular piece of art is finished?
Oh, I wish. I wish. Sometimes they leave the studio and you say, just give me another couple weeks. I really think I could have done better with another couple weeks. But
they have their own endings, don't they? It's the funny part. They don't have to be perfect.
Okay, so I think of it perhaps in a very plebeian way. It's my job. I decided that I would work materials and make sculptures from these materials. So it's what I do. And the goal, of course, is to do something good enough, interesting enough, personal enough that a person who looks at it will be touched by it, they'll be moved by it, they'll be inspired by it, they will have something shift within themselves, often in a very deep and personal place that they too can't explain exactly. But there's that connection. That's what you're hoping to establish. I don't think that any piece is finished. I always think of the work as a bridge. I'm just building a bridge till one day somebody's going to look at it over my dead shoulder and say, well, I guess that meant this, or it meant that, or she was thinking this. I don't know. I don't know. That's the mystery of it. If it were less mysterious, it would be boring to me.
Does it this all are all objects art? And let's put it that way. Or is there art that we can define for whatever reason? We as human beings feel like, I think most of us feel like there are certain forms that we know. Okay, this is art. And even it could be the smallest thing, it could be the oldest thing, it could be the newest thing, but we feel that that's art. Now, some are similar objects, but they don't seem to feel like they're art. They're just decorations. Or is there any difference?
Well, I'll give you an example of something that happened to me maybe the second or third year that I was in Paris. It was a beautiful day. The sun was shining. I was going to take the bus, and I look up, and on the glass wall of the bus, I see this patch that is iridescent and translucent and gold and yellow and crackly, and it's absolutely stunning, like a Pompeian mosaic. And then I look and I say, oh my goodness, somebody threw an egg against the bus stand and it dried there. But I'm in a city that has so much aesthetic, that is so incredibly beautiful, that your eyes get used to looking for the beauty in things.
Right.
Yeah. So there's beauty everywhere.
Well, I think that's I always talk about Italy this way, that even when you're in Italy, even the garbage, that when they throw it out, they arrange it in a way in such that's kind of beautiful, and I think it's part of the culture, right? They just there is a love for life and beauty amongst Italians, and if you're surrounded by that, everything seems to be colored by by that aspect of the culture. But I have to say also that I have a friend. It might take an artistic eye to spot something that beautiful, because I have a friend who takes photographs, and I say this as an example a lot, that if you took a photograph of gum on the street, it would be artistic. If I took that same photograph, it will just be gum on the street, right? There is a certain eye, for whatever reason, and maybe, as you say, a certain energy that one infuses into the work that then turns it into something much more magnificent than a piece of gum on the street. So let's talk about when you have portraiture in your sculptures. Most people, well, a lot of people that we know, when they take up sculpture, they go into more the abstract part of it. Is there a difference in terms of discipline and technique, or is the process the same?
Well, interestingly enough, when I was in school at the Beaux-Arts, we had live models. We drew from the live models, and we also sculpted from live models. And I'll never forget that we had a model that was maybe 21 years old and perfect body and, wonderful. You could put her on a catwalk and she would be perfect. And the whole class kind of got listless and bored and turned away from the subject. And then we got a model that had been ravaged by time. Her body was absolutely a roadmap for what she had been through. And there was nobody that wasn't totally engaged in capturing what this woman represented. And once I started doing work with the human form, it was I would say, the only thing you would not want to do if you wanted to have a successful career and sell a lot of work, because America had moved to abstract expressionism, op art, pop art, installation art, everything that was not to do with the human form. And yet it's what we are. We all are people, and we carry these bodies around with us. Our eyes speak to you. You sit and you take the subway. When I came here, there was a little girl, and she was probably 6 months old, and she's flirting with me with her eyes, So the human form for me is something I'm very attached to, very sensitive of. And when I sculpt a person, my idea is not to sculpt them literally, but to sculpt them spiritually.
Right.
Where does their spirit reside? Where is their soul?
So we were talking about that, the essence of the humanity of whoever they are, which are reflected. When we talked about the Mona Lisa, La Gioconda, it's that half smile that captures us.
Yes.
It's not because she's so beautiful and she's so wonderful, because she is. And it's not even the because of the greatest technique in the painting, because a lot of it we don't even see because it's been covered through years of time. But that particular expression is the essence of who she is. Now, there are very famous sculptors like Rodin and Mayol being one of my favorites. How many more women could you capture in statues?
Yeah.
But they're all different because they have their own different essence. Yours, how would you, if somebody is comparing, if you have to describe, your portraiture to somebody, what would you say?
Okay, a little earlier you prompted a thought that reminded me of when I knew that I could make a sculpture by Leah Poller. The big concern is that you're going to do something that's overly influenced by a famous artist, or that you're going to copy something, or that'll be derivative, and that's a big hole to fall into. That's one of the reasons why art history is so important. You see what has been done everywhere before you. So I did an exercise. I took a magazine, I closed my eyes, I tore out half a dozen pages arbitrarily, I pinned them on my studio wall, and I made a sculpture based on what I saw in these pages from a magazine. And then I looked at it and I said, okay, would you know that that was something that I did? And the answer was, yeah, nobody else would have done it that way. So from that point on, I realized that I did have my signature.
What is that signature in your eyes?
Truth, digging for the truth, the honesty, the veracity of the situation. When I work with a live model on a portrait, we spend a lot of time talking. We talk, we examine each other to the point where there's a transference of trust. And as the person is wandering around the studio, because I don't ask anybody to sit still so I can get the perfect profile, I just want their presence so that I can just check it out and feel them. Something happens, and the sculpture itself starts to breathe.
Just so it comes out. And I think artists would say, whether you're a photographer, or a painter. There's a certain thing that comes out that isn't necessarily a physical thing, but when we see it as human beings, we identify it. That is that person. That is, and that is that artist who made this type of thing. Now, you had. Let's talk about women for a second. You've taken on different topics on women, aging, womanhood, sensuality. What stories do you feel remain to be told in where women in women's place in art?
Okay, that's a perfect segue. I work in really supporting women in the arts. As a woman in the arts and having had a gallery, having sold a lot of art, I feel that it's very important to put some energy behind a segment that has been under-respected. We've seen changes now, but the one thing that I am yearning for, the one thing that has never been put on a pedestal, is the person who has a normal life and performs the functions of a totally not average existence, because it's getting more and more rare to function at all those levels. But you feed your children. How many artists, female artists, have been revered because they abandoned their children, or they couldn't have the conflict of raising children, or they had a different lifestyle that would not permit what I call a normal existence, an existence that most everybody can relate to. So it is possible to be a normal person. You don't have to be the Van Gogh crazy. You don't have to cut off your ear. You don't have to have, green hair. You can just be a normal person doing a really fine job at what you've chosen.
Well, I think it's I think that the difficulty that we have is that human beings have a tendency to label, people, label things. So you're either an artist or you're not an artist, or you're a woman. Women cannot have it all, but men can have it all for whatever reason, which is sort of like interesting. A man can be both a father, a good father, a good horseback rider or athlete, and a good chef, and a smart businessman, and they can have it all and have children and all of those things. But women can't. Women had to have choices because their positions, I would argue, their positions were limited. They were limited to either this or that. It can't be, it can't be both of them. And so somebody who does all of the ordinary, seemingly ordinary things in life cannot possibly be extraordinary. Right? You can't be both. Right? So you couldn't be a good mother and a wonderful artist and a great dancer and all of those things as well. But women have, I think, forged on, as best as we can. But I think they're still underrepresented in art, don't you think? Like the amount of people we know, male artists, we can identify male artists quicker than we can identify female artists, I would argue.
Yeah, well, the statistics speak for themselves. I'm involved with the New York Society of Women Artists, and we just celebrated our centennial. And we have to look at the facts. The facts are that more than 50% of artists, declared artists, are female. Only 2% make it to an auction at Sotheby's. Only 10% get into museums at all. And as soon as the identity is known, the chances drop more and more and more. But getting back to when I was in school, my professor did not give us false expectations. He said, you become a sculptor maybe after 25 years, you know how to sculpt. It's slow and you have to do a lot to be able to learn those lessons. And it's not for you to say you're an artist. Let other people say that. I say I sculpt. You say I'm an artist. I accept that.
Well, that's the Trinity, right? Anybody can write, I suppose, but the writer, puts out the work, and if people read them, then you're a writer. If people don't want to read them, then you're still a writer, but you're not necessarily at the level of the people that we revere as good artists and that write poetry. Anybody can write poetry, but I think to have that connection with another human being is what's important about the art. Now, having said that, we talked about artificial intelligence sort of like coming into play, and whether the creation of a particular object becomes art, even if it's not made by a human being. Now, perhaps if it's energy, if art is energy, then maybe it doesn't matter that it's a human being. But in my mind, there's also that sort of, when you are sculpting a portrait of a model, there is a connection that I can see when I'm looking at it, that relates to you and the model. So it's sort of that, that thing, or does that even really matter, having that connection between human beings to create art?
Pixels on a screen are not brushstrokes. You perhaps can get a lot of ideas by using artificial intelligence. You can prepare, you can move things around easier, you can come to other considerations from the multitude of possibilities that are available with AI. But it's a little bit like eating a McDonald's and having something made by a 4-star chef. the love that goes into it, the passion, the commitment, you can taste it. And I think that if you look at art enough, it's not just colors and squares you put on walls. It actually informs your very, very sense of being alive. When you wake up in the morning, I remember I had a wonderful, wonderful painting behind my bed, and I was requested for a museum exhibition. And so I loaned it to the museum for 6 months. And every time I walked in the bedroom, that space with nothing in it behind my bed was so huge that it actually kind of hurt. And I couldn't wait for the piece to come back and put it in its rightful place. So I think that each and every artwork is unique. How you relate to it is unique. And how much you choose to be in that commitment of existence, of being present to how you feel and what you see. And there's some wonderful books out there. I could recommend some, but in one, there was actually a discussion on the science of what we see. And the fact is, we don't see. We extrapolate. You only see 20% of anything. I only see 20% of you, but I met you the other day, and I can fill in all those little pieces and say, there's Loy, okay? But you're not there.
Right.
You're just a kind of...
Well, that's what I was saying. I was thinking about that this weekend. That like I say, it's the impression. I was looking at the sunset, and I tried to remember it in my mind's eye, and all I really remember is the impression of what it was. It's not everything. The camera captures everything, but my eyes capture the impression of what it is.
That's right.
And thank God for me, I have very romantic eyes, because some things you see more beautiful than it is, closer than it is. If you're looking at the skyscrapers, for instance, you feel they're closer to you than the camera does. And so there's a change. But this is a nice segue to your to the bed series. So let's talk a little bit about what is the bed series.
It's autobiographical. It has become autobiographical because once I started it based on a personal event, I had an accident in my studio and I was bedridden for an extended period of time. I couldn't work on anything that had any weight to it. I'd been using heavy materials, so I could only work on a tabletop in my bed. And I made a bed. I made a sculpture of a bed. It was on my mind, right? And then I made another one, and I realized that there was a relationship linguistically between the word bed and the object bed that I was making. So then I sat down, I made a list, and I executed a dozen pieces. They went into an exhibition, and it sold out the first night. And those were the days when the cell phone wasn't available. People started to call me and give me words with bed in it. So I said, whoa, this is interesting. I made a first list, and there were over 100 beds. And I realized that it was a linguistic form that I was curious about, how we transported the idea of bedrock or riverbed or bed and breakfast into our psyche and use these words without thinking twice when the image is a bed. And then, of course, my curiosity led me to research. There's no materials on the subject. You can get information about certain types of beds made at different periods of time, but a bed isn't really more than what you do there. It's what happens that it becomes the bed, right?
Well, that's interesting because I also, I was thinking culturally, there are certain cultures that don't use beds. Not in the classical way that we, what we know it. Yet there is, people would say like a rolled up, woven mat is the bed, and it becomes the bed when somebody is on it. But there's also a certain personality with beds.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's a very personal thing. Some people want it, a certain way and want to look at a certain way. But the moment if you go on vacation, the one thing that you miss most is lying down in your own bed, right?
Feels good to get home.
Yes, that's when it feels like home. But you have a lot of other things that you're working on now. Yes. Sculpture, bronze is difficult material to work with. It's not easy.
Excessively difficult.
And now, but you also are doing this not just you're doing it in Italy. You just came back from Italy. You're doing it here, obviously, and you're also in China. So let's talk about: is there a difference in the way people around the world look at sculpture, specifically, or art in general, about how it's made, or the importance or the value of it, and what the future looks like in terms of sculpture?
No question about it.
Let's compare. Let's say the two different ones. The Italians that are very classical, and then the Chinese in Beijing. What are we seeing? Are they in parallel direction, or are they looking at it differently? Because you're in both worlds.
I haven't had enough time in Italy to actually test the waters to see what everybody has to say. And in fact, I'm starting a new series using words that have letto in them. Letto means bed in Italian. And guess what? There's more than 100 words with letto in them. So I started to work on that and using a different material, which is a material first used in Italy and still traditionally used in Italy and very rarely used outside for what we would call serious art. I think to answer your question a little bit more precisely, when I accidentally ended up at the world's largest art foundry in China. This is a foundry that has 800 trained employees and 80,000 square meters of studio space. This is big. I couldn't believe that they would want to work with me, that my little beds would make a difference or matter. And I'm talking about my work next to monuments. And so at first I was a little bit, scared. I was afraid that one day they would discover it was just a little bed. But as the years went by, and now we're into 15 years of this relationship, and we're starting another project together, they said something to me. I said, why did you care about my little beds when you were making these monuments? The last one they did is 5 times taller than the Statue of Liberty.
Wow.
So it's monumental, beyond anything we do in America. And they said, but most of that work is done by groups of artists working together. They're technical people who execute an object, a subject. You're an artist, you create. And they've been true to that from day one. It's been amazing.
Are there apprenticeships that's going on in China now, as well, or is it, how I know quite a. I think I guess just like in every other place in the world, there are people who like the classical arts. There's also the traditional Chinese art, but there's also a lot of interest in more abstract expressionist art among the Chinese. I mean, the collectors at least like modern art. How has art changed in China since the I guess the more commercialization of China as in general, or do you feel like it's always been there and it's just getting bigger and bigger because of the opportunities?
Well, I can give you 2 examples. One is that a few years ago, China announced that it was going to create 300 new art museums. We're lucky if we get 2 a year, and they're going to do 300 in the next 5 years. Culture to them is more than 2,000 years old, the Bronze Age. They have bronzes in Beijing at the temple that are 2,000 years old, and you can't imagine what they were capable of executing at that time. But what you're seeing also, take any situation from America and multiply it by 10. So if you have 1,000 billionaires in America, you have 10,000 billionaires in China. And they will collect art. And the most interesting thing is that the older generation has declared itself somewhat lacking in knowledge and open spirit. And so they have put their children in the role of acquiring art for the family's heritage.
So what is there, where do you fit in these? Because I know you have multiple more projects in China. You're coming up with a really big one in 2026.
Yes.
And we talked about the tarot, which is how big is it going to be?
They're going to be about 2.5 meters by 4 meters. Yeah.
And your how long does it? How long do you think it would take you to from start to finish before you could?
Can I come back in a year and tell you what it took? I'm not sure. It's an experiment that I'm working directly with the foundry on, and I'll tell you, it came about through some unusual circumstances and an interaction with a master of tarot and a philosopher who was completely intrigued by the bronze process viewed from the alchemistry perspective. And so he met me over in China, and we started to conjure up some possibilities. And we did tarot readings morning, noon, and night. And so I presented a project to the head of the foundry to do these giant tarot cards, but they are going to be an assemblage, and I'm going to use the scraps from the foundry. So when you imagine the size of what they normally work on, a scrap takes 2 men and a crane to move into place, which is why I can't answer your question on how much time and what. So the hardest part was to convince the foundry that with a zero waste policy, they could sacrifice some of the recovery of these materials and let me work them and create the tarot cards with them. So it's an adventure. We'll see.
Well, it's certainly exciting. Now, one last question before we go. Is there a question that if no one ever asks you that you wish somebody would when it comes to art?
Yes. I'll be very blunt. Why does the art market chase 2% of the world's population to sell the same people art when their role should really be to convert the 98% that is afraid to buy art into art lovers and art buyers at every level? Why?
Well, we remember again, we talked about Fran Lebowitz saying that they applaud the price, they don't applaud the artist. And I think that's part of what's keeping a lot of the art, would be art collectors from indulging in art. Because if they bought something for $25, it doesn't feel like it's valuable art. Because the world tells us that the $25 million one or the $250 million one is the one that you should covet. These artisans, if you go to, I go to Provincetown quite a bit, and there used to be artists that are in training, or they just want to do things. They're not very expensive pieces of work, but people look at them as lesser art than the ones that we are told are collectible. And so I think if we wanted to convert the world, the 98% into art lovers and art collectors, we have to erase that idea that art can only be good art if it's expensive art.
If my final word would be that the language around art and artists has to change. The closest parallel is diamonds or petroleum. It's a natural resource. It's deep, deep, deep down in the earth, if you want to call the psyche earth. And somebody has to pull it out, refine it, condition it, and put it in a place where it can be used and applied. And we should be using art to apply to culture, not to apply to price tags.
Right.
So if that language would change, and you would look at each and every artist as you would look at somebody who's capable of transforming raw materials. It's like a farmer.
Right.
The farmer plants a seed, and you get to eat it on your dinner table, right?
Well, I think it's the problem that we're having is that art isn't, as we know it today, especially, it does just as in real estate. We used to think of real estate as a house that you lived in or a place that you worked in. But a lot of people think of it as an investment. Even if they live there, they look at it as an investment. And art right now is being looked at as an investment, as a form of investment, but not as a financial investment, not as a personal investment. And I think what you're talking about is looking at art as deeply intrinsic to our investment in the culture of humanity, in our connection with each other.
Yeah.
That would allow us to appreciate, everything from everyone from all over the world, just like we do with, music and food and all of these things that connected us as human beings.
We are custodians during our lifetime. All we're doing is taking care of it. You show me who got buried with a Picasso in their tombstone. I mean, the pharaohs used to take their jewelry and all, but
Right.
really, so what does it mean that you possess this, that it cost you 9 figures? I don't think that's the point. The point is that we want to be careful when we talk about the art market, and we want to talk about art as culture. And if you stomp on your culture and you don't respect it, you will inherit something pretty sad, and you'll pass something very sad on to your heirs and your family. This is what I spend a lot of time trying to defend. Is
Right.
Look at it from a different perspective.
Right. Art is something, we work very hard to, as they say, to be able to enjoy these things, art, in all of its form, whether it's poetry, whether it's sculpture, whether it's paintings. That's what we enjoy doing. It's not something that we trade as a commodity. Without any other. It's what connects all of us together. It's how we identify. The deeper thoughts that we have, the deeper emotions, that we have, is expressed through art. Well, in all sorts of forms, in music, in plays, in television, in all of these things. I think are a reflection of who we are, and I think that's what's getting lost. We keep talking about the sellability of things, sellability of movies, sellability of books, sellability of, we forget that the reason we do them is for that connection with that artist.
When we are in touch with ourselves, we can begin to be in touch with art. And they say everywhere, art is a language. Well, learn a new language. You will have so much richer life because of it. And possessing things is not the same as the wealth. I like peace and good wealth. It just goes through my head every day when I think of how you chose the name for good wealth, because I think that that's something that has been overlooked. You should have good wealth.
Not just wealth for the sake of
That's right, good wealth. If it's not working on you and making you a better person,
What is
how
it
good
for?
would it be?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and on that note, thank you so much, Leah Poller, for such a beautiful and profound discussion about art, life, and culture. We are privileged to have you here and hope to have you back soon. And on that note, we are here. We're going to say goodbye. Thank you, Colin Megley. Thank you, Leah Poller. Thank you, Perry Law, Dieter Borbeck, Kenneth Moore. And on behalf of Global Wealth, this is Loy Carlos wishing you peace and good luck.